Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining another Enable Boot Camp today. Honeypots and less known cybersecurity controls. As always, we're going to go ahead and get the legalese out of the way up front. If we make any forward-looking statements today, take it with a grain of salt. Final form, function, delivery dates may change. So if we make any allusions today, keep that in mind. So for anybody that's joining a boot camp for the first time, I'm Lewis Pope, one of the head nerds at Enable. We're the team that puts on a lot of our boot camp and office hour sessions. We are a team of subject matter experts, usually with extensive experience in the MSP space. My background is from an MSP before I joined Enable. Been here for about 6 years. Focus has been on security best practices, security baselines, the nitty-gritty practical implementation of security controls. So I'm a great resource for you if you have those types of challenges. You don't know which direction to go. You don't know how to answer the questions that are being brought to you by your clients around compliance or specific frameworks. Feel free to reach out. And as a giant disclaimer, whenever we're doing any of these security boot camps, this is all part of a larger journey. This is not the totality of everything concerning best practices or proper use of honeypots, other diversionary or distraction tactics, techniques, and processes that we're going to be talking about today. Good cybersecurity practices require ongoing, continuous modification, additions, improvements, and refinements. So this is only going to be a part of the journey, not a total journey today. What we're going to be covering today is going to be a little bit on where is the line between basic and advanced cybersecurity controls, just because it's going to help with some of the other questions and topics we'll be talking about later in the session. Some trends in the MSP channel that you should probably be aware of if you are in the MSP channel and you're not here as an internal IT. Diversions and deception techniques in cybersecurity. We'll be covering a bunch of different types. Honeypots, decoy systems, and then other diversionary techniques. And easy ways to get started, because a lot of today's conversation is going to be theory, a little bit of execution, but you need something to run with. You need ways to execute, and I'll be covering a couple of open source options at the end of the boot camp that you can get running with fairly quickly with minimum effort and foreknowledge. All right, so first is basics of cybersecurity control. So what are the basics? And I'm going to try not to be too philosophical about this and keep it tightly scoped into what we're in the concept and in the frame of MSPs. So the basics around cybersecurity controls, of course, the answer you never like to hear because you just want an answer is it depends. But it really does, because, well, what is the risk profile of your client's environment? Do they have to adhere to a certain set of compliancy or standards like Cyber Essentials, the Essential 8, maybe NIST cybersecurity framework, or the CIS implementation groups, whatever it may be? That's all going to heavily depend upon the risk profile of your clients and their budget. So what you are doing for the basics as an MSP may not align with another MSP because of a difference in, not only in a difference of skills and personnel that you have available to deliver services, but also in the type of clients that you're serving. But what do these general basics look like? So this is off of years of experience in the MSP space, plus our current partners, what we see out in the MSP channel. What are the core basics that are getting offered? Vulnerability remediation through making sure that you're doing patching of OSs, third parties, and firmware updates for network appliances, computers, firewalls, whatever it may be. Endpoint protection is starting to become a de facto now option for MSPs and getting away from traditional endpoint protection. Backing up mission critical data for clients, firewall or secure gateways, DNS and content filtering, email filtering and security, end user cybersecurity awareness training, secure infrastructure design, and MFA and credential management. It's a grab bag of things, but usually this is what is in the basics or the minimum viable service that most MSPs are offering. If this is below what you're offering and you feel like this falls short of what you consider basics, great, you're ahead of the curve. If this looks like more than what you're doing for the basics, then just take this as these are some roadmap items that I need to look at and evaluate if we need to start bringing this into our basic or entry level services that you're offering, because this is fast becoming, again, across the MSP channel, fast becoming the standards. And if you're not doing these things, then it makes it easier for your competition to stand out from you. So if that's the basics, what's advanced? Or what are we going to be considering advanced today? So again, we're just looking at the MSP market as a whole. You might be above or below this, but advanced is usually a SIM or a SOAR being incorporated, handling secure configuration of endpoints and other devices and handling change management on those, ongoing compliance management, SaaS security event monitoring. So if you have a client with M365, you're monitoring security alerts out of there. Penetration testing, business continuity services. These are usually a little bit on the higher end for what for services MSPs are offering. Frameworks and standards. So whenever we start talking about, well, what are the advanced frameworks? Usually it's going to be things like what's called for in the CIS implementation, CIS controls implementation group 3, the security controls that are needed under NIST 800, 171, 53, and 61, ISO 27001, or CMMC version 2, level 2, and level 3. These would all be, what would be, for the most part, considered to be more advanced security controls. And again, if you're above this or under this, if you're above it, great, you're ahead of the curve. If you're under, don't panic. There's time to catch up. You don't have to do these things if your clients do not have a high enough risk profile, or maybe just the local economics of where your MSP operates dictates that you are providing services to smaller businesses that can't afford these types of security controls. Make sure you take that in consideration. Don't feel like if you're not doing these things, you're falling short. You can still be a very, very successful and large MSP without getting into the advanced category of stuff. So diversion and deception. These are some principles in the more advanced cybersecurity controls and practices used by defenders. First is diversion. That is step one. That is about getting somebody's attention and make them pay attention to something you want them to pay attention to rather than what they want to pay attention to. So in cybersecurity, diversionary practices are all about getting an attacker to waste their time and their resources by getting their attention with shiny targets. This can help improve security through obfuscation. It's the whole can't see the forest for the trees scenario. If you have only 15 legitimate systems on a subnet and there's another 80 fake assets on that subnet, it's going to make it a lot harder for an attacker to understand what they're dealing with. They're going to have to waste more time understanding the environment. And usually diversionary tactics result in a dead end for the attacker. So they find a system on the environment, it catches their interest, they look at it, but it just keeps dead ending on them. It's nothing useful comes out of it, and eventually they'll probably move on. And this is typically a practice in scale of how many shiny things can you distract them with. Then there's deception. And deception is, well, once you've got their attention, how do you keep them engaged? This is here to deceive attackers, to provide them with disinformation, to actively sabotage their efforts by providing them with a depth of data or a depth of complexity in the systems to make them have to work really hard to understand what they're looking at, and because of that, cause them to develop an altered view or an untrue view of the network and the landscape they're trying to operate in. It usually involves bait, so you're making attackers dig deeper in the wrong direction. You're trying to draw them a map on a map that is wrong to a place that doesn't exist. You're sending them on a wild goose chase and hoping that you can keep them occupied for as long as you can, and at the same time increasing the likelihood that they're going to trigger an alert or a monitor that you've got set up somewhere. And the benefits and challenges with taking this approach of introducing diversionary and deception techniques into your practices, benefits are fairly straightforward. It is all about earlier detection of threats and intrusion events. This lets you see threat actors poking around and take action on non-sensitive endpoints and environments before they try to do it in production. This can also help reduce false positives, as interactions with decoy systems or deception systems are generally going to be an actual indicator of malicious activity, and we'll be discussing how that plays out. But if you take the time to set up a decoy and somebody accesses it, well, you know your normal end users aren't accessing that resource. You're not having to make the differentiation between what is normal traffic and what is odd traffic or unusual traffic. And also getting insight into a threat actor before they start making lateral movements. If you can watch what they're doing to a decoy system and understand what they're, or a decoy network, you'll be able to understand, well, what are their tactics, what are their techniques, what are the processes they're using, and then go look for that in your production environment. Introducing these practices, though, does introduce challenges. The upkeep of the deception and diversionary systems that you're going to implement is an ongoing effort. They are systems that will have to be monitored and managed, that they will have to be improved upon and modified over time. So it's not something that you can kind of just set up one time and walk away from. They need TLC to maintain their effectiveness. Also, introducing these types of techniques and the systems you're going to need in order to do them is going to introduce the opportunity to incorrectly set them up. And that misconfiguration might give an attacker access to information you wouldn't want them to otherwise have, or to obtain a foothold and expose real assets. And then there's also the additional licensing and complexity of monitoring these decoy systems. Depending on what tools and how you decide to do that, it can represent a significant increase in license expenditure. So while these challenges are there, usually the benefits very much outweigh them, so it's worth pursuing anyway. Honeypots, honey nets, and other deception practices. Whenever you look out into the MSP channel right now, who is using honeypots? So from vendors, Most of your EDR solutions are already using honeypot files. It's just a way they build the product so that they can monitor for modifications of those files to let them know that something might be amiss on the system. A lot of SOAR and SIM services have the capability of using honeypots. There are also a few cyber deception services out there. They are usually more geared towards web services and attack surface mitigation, but they are services that are out there actively being offered in the MSP channel. From the MSP side, so MSPs that are using honeypots, like we're going to be talking about them today. Most MSPs consider this to be more of an internal IT or enterprise IT practice, not something that their particular client segment needs. A few are incorporating diversion and deception during their infrastructure design and building out their client networks. The old classic things such as don't name your server, name your server something that looks like a workstation name, and name your workstation something that looks like something that's not going to entice somebody to go poking around. To some of the more complex diversion and deception techniques we'll be talking about later. And there's even fewer MSPs out there right now that are building recurring monthly revenue around deception or diversion as a service. So they don't have it built in to their managed services programs as a service that they are charging for, which is, it is a missed opportunity, but at the same time, it's, does your client base, is your client base receptive to this, and can you package it and deliver it at a margin that's going to be acceptable for you? So decoy systems and decoy data. This is the two very broad categorizations of what is used most of the time whenever we're talking about deceptive technologies. First is, decoy systems. These are just going to be a system that mimics a genuine asset, and it's there just to slow down an attacker or to capture the activities of them. An example of this would be having multiple virtual hosts on a network, or a fake server that encourages an attacker to waste their time and efforts on trying to interact with it, log into it, port scan it, try to leverage vulnerabilities against it. Those shiny things on the network to get an attacker's attention. Another example of this would be having, like with the virtual hosts on the network, setting it up so you have your DHCP pool on a subnet set up to be, all right, we're going to issue DHCP addresses between 192.168.20.10 to .30, and the 13 computers in the environment is going to be there, and then you set up these virtual hosts on a bunch of other static addresses in the environment, or hide those legitimate systems in between the virtual hosts. So having your legitimate systems assign IP address, such as one would be .25, one would be .38, one would be .57, and in between those IP ranges would be a bunch of virtual hosts on the network taking up those IP addresses. Again, forest for the trees, making it that much harder for attackers to understand what they're dealing with. Decoy data is going to be documents, false records, entries in a database, whatever it may be, designed to entice an attacker to access them, and then alert whenever those assets are being accessed by an attacker, whether it's internal or external. Also, you have the option of including disinformation in that data so that it leads those attackers where you want them to go. Again, helping them draw the map incorrectly of the network, and then giving them instructions for a valuable payoff that doesn't exist. And honeypots are a specific sub item of those broader concepts. Honeypots are a system specifically created to attract the interest of a threat actor that's going to mimic the legitimate systems that an attacker would normally expect to see to varying degrees. And you're going to closely monitor those to alert whenever it is touched, whenever it's modified, whenever it sees particular actions, or you can leverage it on the deep end. If you really want to dive in deep and you want to put on a name tag that says security analyst, monitoring the tactics, techniques, and processes that a threat actor is using on those honeypots, so that you can make sure that those tactics, techniques, and processes they are using aren't going to be effective in your production environment. Honeypots, these are 4 general categorizations. It's not exhaustive, but typically they're going to fall into research, production, low interaction, and high interaction. Research is going to be, those are the honeypots that get exposed out to the internet for attackers to go after them so that a security researcher can study the results. This is exactly what groups like Talos, Cisco's Talos, Sentinel-1, Sentinel Labs, and thousands of other security researchers do all day, every day. They put honeypots out on the internet and watch what comes in. Then there's production, and this is what you're putting into your production environment so that you can see the indicators, capture that bad behavior by enticing an attacker to hit it. And then low interaction and high interaction, I'll be talking about those in depth a little bit later, but just for here, low interaction are the things that you do set up and you walk away from, and you just wait for the trap to be triggered. And then high interaction is you actively work back and forth and make modifications to the environment, to the data, to the systems as a potential attacker is poking around. For some specific examples around honeypots, so this could be a VM that you monitor for failed login attempts against. If you set up a virtual machine in an environment, none of your normal regular users are supposed to be using it. You've got a limited set of user accounts on it set up. There's no, really expansive permissions on the machine. You're just looking to see if somebody tries to log into it, because that's unusual. You can have the web service app that's exposed to the internet or in a DMZ or in the cloud, recording and alerting. So this is a little bit more to the research approach. You can have an ARM device like a smaller Intel NUC, a Raspberry Pi, a open source NAS device, whatever it may be, with a file share server and SMB v1 enabled, and monitoring the network connections that are going back and forth to that device, because, well, it's a file share that nobody else in the company is supposed to be using, so nobody should have it mapped. And there's SMB v1 enabled, which would be an attractive, vulnerable service for an attacker to go after. And then some specific examples, there's HoneyD, Kippo, and Teapot. I'm going to be talking about those at the end of the session. Those are some open source solutions that are going to, again, would be available for you to kind of get that head start without having to do this all from scratch and build it up. So then what is a honeynet? And this is not a term that you see as commonly, but it's a great term to use because it kind of helps explain to a non-technical individual why you're going to put so much effort into this if you are going to take this approach. A honeypot is simply, a honeynet is a collection of honeypots. And the more honeypots that you can put on a network to fool and attract an attacker to revealing their activity, the better chances you're going to have of catching them. One honeypot is not going to be effective one honeypot device is not going to be as effective as setting up multiple decoy systems, virtual host, and fake services that are sitting there being attractive targets. So that honeynet approach is what you really need in production most times, instead of just one single item or one single honeypot. So low efforts. So just for things you can do today with just your RMM to get some of this type of honeypots or deceptive security controls in place. One is, well, just go to devices, a few of them, and create a local user account that sounds important but has no permissions. Really, it can't do anything on the network, and set it up with an enticing name, something like systems admin, but give it no real permissions. Make it a work group account, and then monitor for any login attempts on that account, because anybody trying to log into that account is poking around where they shouldn't be. And a user could definitely easily find out that, oh, there's a systems admin account on this computer. Let me try logging into it. That could happen, but it's much less likely to happen whenever it's just a virtual host or VM on the network that they don't have normal access to. It's not likely to be a false positive scenario whenever that pops. So that is a really good low effort way. Another is to instead of a decoy asset like a user account on a system, you could go for files on a system. So the decoy file approach. Create some valuable looking decoy files that are called things like payroll accounts. Host them where they can be found on the network, but not in the normal locations that everybody works from. And then monitor for read, write, move, or delete actions through your RMM or EDR. And the little snippet of PowerShell code I've got right there is the initial building block for most of this. You populate a list of, all right, here's the files. Here are the last time they were accessed. And then on the subsequent times the check runs, check to see if that last access time has changed. And if it has, you'll know somebody's been poking around. Some solutions are kind of already, again, have that built into them, such as EDR solutions. This is a native function that is a default out of the option configuration for most modern EDR solutions. But if you want to take it even further, like for example, our EDR solution that's powered by SentinelOne, if you have the complete license and you're using the custom rules there, you can take this even a step further and do active, as it happens monitoring, say, and be able to tell that endpoint that you have EDR on that if you ever see this specific behavior, let me know about it. And then there's passive versus active deception. So passive, that's mimicking genuine assets. They're typically isolated from production environments, and they're not that in depth. Usually they're surface level decoys. And their job is typically just to let you know whenever whether it's a honeypot or decoy data, it's really just to let you know whenever they are accessed by somebody, somehow, somewhere. False network traffic between systems is also a good way of passive deception, because you're just setting up, say for example, you got one of those virtual hosts or a VM you're using as a honeypot, and you've got it configured for the DNS server for that device to be another honeypot or another VM that you've got an open source DNS server, or you have a Windows server with the DNS role enabled on it, and you're monitoring that DNS service there for any request for DNS resolution, because, well, the rest of the environment, normal conditions, they should be using whatever you have defined as the DNS server for that environment. But if somebody hits or compromises that virtual machine and you start seeing DNS requests coming out of it that are above and beyond the normal ones you're used to seeing from it, then that's a pretty good indicator that somebody is poking around. Active deception is going to be dynamic honeypots that modify their behavior based on detected activity, whether that is an automated response or that's a response that's initiated by a defender. That might also include providing false data back to an attacker to mislead them as they are moving around an environment or accessing files. You may see that they're getting aggressive about poking around and trying to access an SQL database. Well, stand up a fake SQL database for them to start focusing on to get their attention while you go work on evicting them from the environment. Stand up new decoys during an engagement. So again, that's the whole diverting an attacker's attention, making them split their efforts, or moving compromised systems into a non-production environment that's baited with virtual host to monitor a threat actor's action. So if you have a production system that all of a sudden starts, you see unusual behavior on it and you're worried it might be compromised, move it into a separate network that's outside of production but has other virtual machines and other virtual services available on it, so the attacker doesn't know that you've isolated that device and that they should abandon it. And these are all things that are here on the active side. They're about giving you more time. They're about extending the engagement with the attacker to your benefit. So you have time to better understand what they're doing, what they do and do not have access to, and to properly evict them. So what's the easy option? You made the decision that, you've got the basics covered. You know that you're in a good spot and you need more, but you don't know what that is. How do you start? First, I would probably say would be Honeyed. This is an open source Linux option. It is going to be a daemon that lets you create multiple virtual hosts on your networks. This is a very quick and easy way to take one physical device and create multiple fake devices on the network. You'll be able to, this can help you hide legitimate systems among a forest of fakes. Again, back to, setting up a static IP assignment and peppering your legitimate systems within a sea of fake systems. This can simulate the OSs at the TCP IP level, so this will look like, will convincingly look like real systems to most attackers. You'll also be able to run apps under those virtual IPs for the Honeyed daemons that you'll be running. Also, you could use it for a wireless honeypot. This is something that comes up not so much in small retail operations, but does come up in financial, industrial control, medical practices, dental offices, about wireless access, as in, well, who's here, who's accessing what over the wireless? Do we have do we have guest networks set up? Do you have some type of either radius or other multi-factor authentication for being able to access that, secure gateways, whatever it may be? But it still pays to be able to see when somebody is trying to poke around on that free internet to try and see what they can get to. So you can just take an extra old laptop, install Linux on it, install Honeyed, and then set up its ability to be a wireless honeypot. It'll sit there and broadcast itself as an access point. Name it something convincing for the business, that's going to get somebody who is actually physically going to the target, war driving, wireless audits, or wireless surveying, whatever they may be doing. Give them a target so that they'll go access it and then see what they're doing. Figure out what types of attacks they're trying to use, what kind of vulnerabilities they might try to exploit. Just pay attention to what they're doing and make sure that if they tried that on your real systems, you have countermeasures in place. Also, you can discover compromised devices by monitoring traffic to the honeypots. So if you set up a bunch of virtual machines and or virtual hosts in the environment, you're not going to tell all of your legitimate systems to send a lot of traffic to those fake devices. But if an endpoint is compromised and somebody starts trying to use that device to poke around to do discovery, they're going to, they are during that process going to start hitting all of those fake devices. And if all of a sudden you see the same IP address showing up as being the source for a connection or the source for a packet on a bunch of virtual hosts, well, okay, something has changed. Why is that legitimate device now reaching over here and trying to talk to these fake devices? Something isn't right. You need to go investigate. This is the simplest of the tools. If you can install Linux, you should be able to leverage this. Teapot is another great open source solution. So where honeyed is the breadth, you're getting a large, quick, expansive coverage. It's not very deep. Teapot is where you go really deep. This is a Linux distro that's built on using Docker and containers to run multiple different types of honeypot solutions, and there are a lot of them. Snare, Log4Pot, which is a great way to monitor for Log4j exploitation attempts in an environment. Cisco ASA, great way for monitoring if your Cisco appliances are getting hit. What kind of traffic's getting to them, what kind of vulnerabilities are attempting to be exploited against them. There are a lot of different honeypots and visualization and investigation tools included in Teapot. So again, if you can install Linux, this is a great open source option to get started with this. Everything's free. You don't have to worry about licensing. Best way to start learning. Now, this came up in the morning session, and I don't have it in here, but there's also Kali Linux. Kali Linux has the ability to do a lot of, while it's more popular for its function, for its investigative work, for its pen testing capabilities, it is also can be used for honeypot operations. And if you've not used Kali Linux before and you are interested in digital forensics analysis, maybe one day you want to make a career change into a role that has security analyst in the title, Kali Linux, Kali, is probably one of the best tools to get started with, because the first barrier of entry is just learning how to install Linux. That's not that hard. Then it's just individual tutorials for each individual tool that's available. So it's easy to get started, and it's easy to take it in bite-sized chunks as you go. Another great open source option is Security Onion. If you have at any point in time needed a network-based IDS or IPS, but you couldn't afford the client's budget couldn't afford an appliance or the licensing to go with it, Security Onion is an option. It is an open source network security monitoring tool, log management, and threat hunting. It has a lot of very refined functions in it, where the previous two, Teapot and Honeyed, there are a lot of great open source tools here. If they work for you, great. If they don't work for you, well, you got to figure that out. With Security Onion, it's a much more refined product, more polish on it. So there's not going to be as many times where you run into a, well, this don't work scenario. It's just with Security Onion, it's a question of, well, I just need to learn how to use it. So the main component of it is the network intrusion detection system and the alerts it can generate. That's leveraging Suricata. So the way that would work is you would install Security Onion, Linux distro, on a repurposed piece of equipment, a workstation, a server, whatever it is. It just needs to be something that has a good large bandwidth NIC on it. The better the NIC, the more bandwidth it can ingest. Usually server class NICs are better for this because of some extra functionality. But what you do is you just take and plug this into a span port or a mirror port on a managed switch, or you connect it inline in between your router or firewall and your edge. Or if you need it on the inside of the network, you put it on the inside with a span port. Whatever you do, once you've got it in place, you've now taken a repurposed, decommissioned piece of hardware and now turned it into a security appliance that otherwise would have cost you thousands of dollars. It is a great way to start playing around with these technologies again without the upfront cost. It also has an IDS honeypot functionality in it you can set up as well. And it also has cases in it and really good workflows for incident response. So if you find that your teams, need exposure to better understand what proper workflows and processes should look like for this type of stuff, pretty good examples in here. Oh, and there is and Security Onion is open source. You can start using it today, tomorrow, in a matter of minutes, no cost associated with it. But the maintainers for it do offer ready to purchase equipment that's already configured, as well as support, training, and a bunch of other stuff. So if you have the budget for it, you can purchase direct instead of going the I'll roll up my sleeves and figure it out myself approach. So how much should you invest in deception and diversion? So whether it's the honeypots, decoy files, decoy network, virtual hosts, whatever it may be, how much effort should you be putting into that? How much is that effort worth? And this is another one of those, well, it depends questions. It's dependent upon your skill sets that you have available, your staffing, the risk profile of your clients. But I usually try to boil it down to, as long as it doesn't take away from you implementing your basic security baselines, then you're good. But if it's going to take away from you implementing the basics, you probably need to wait. If you're in a situation today where you feel like you don't have enough time to deal with what you currently have to deal with, adding in these types of new technologies, techniques, and processes is only going to create additional workload or diminishing returns. Nobody's going to be able to own it. You're not going to be able to incorporate it properly into your existing workflows, your ticketing structure, your alerting, and it will become just decoy systems that somebody installs one day and they persist for weeks, months, or years, recording useful telemetry data for you, but nobody ever takes advantage of it or does anything with it. So don't get over eager with it. Don't deploy them just because you can. I wouldn't recommend anybody downloading something like Honeyed and then going out to your clients and starting to spend up, enough virtual hosts to occupy your entire IP range after you have all your static IPs assigned. Uh, it needs forethought, it needs planning, and it needs a little bit of the benefit of experience as well. But just ask yourself that simple question of, is this going to take away from me doing the basics? And if it's not, proceed forward with it. Then there's also the question, well, how do I monetize this? Are we going to be doing this simply as a way to, reduce our risk exposure by reducing the risk exposure of our clients? The more risk the more risk reduction, remediation, and mitigation that you can do for your client, the less likely they are to cause you financial damage. So therefore, why not do these things to improve? Or is it well, can we package this? Can we create a service around it? Can we still offer more for it? And I mean, the answer is yes. You can definitely create services and packages around this as an advanced security offering. And here's a question. We use enables EDR for our customers. If they have EDR, do we also need to set up or look into honeypots? If you're looking for more things to improve the security of your clients, your current cybersecurity stance, and you're asking that question of, well, what more can I do because I've already done all of these other things I know I need to do? Absolutely, look into honeypots. You may not have to go into the deep end of it. It might only need to be a few things like adding in additional, if you're using EDR, maybe you just add in a couple of additional star rules if you're using the complete license, where you're just telling the EDR agent, hey, I'm now going to monitor you for logins on these specific types of user accounts, or I need you to start alerting me to any time a remote session is started on an endpoint. Those are things that you can do today with EDR and the complete license. And that question of, again, should you, is it going to improve the security stance of your client? It'll improve their security stance. Can you quantify it by how much? That's a different conversation that's going to be dependent on the client. Setting up a bunch of honeypots, virtual hosts in a small retail client's office that only has like 4 computers and 8 point of sale terminals. Taking the time and the effort to set up a bunch of virtual hosts in there, what's the benefit? What are you going to catch? Versus if you're you've got a manufacturer client that is, maybe they're having to worry about CMMC version 2 compliance, level 1, level 2, or level 3. Absolutely, honeypot should be leveraged in those environments, because that is, the risk profile of the client is high enough that it kind of dictates that, yes, we need to use more advanced methods of defending this client rather than just the normal stuff that an attacker knows is going to be there and is already going to be trying to avoid. The honeypots are there to catch them while they're trying to avoid everything else they know they should be avoiding. And what that looks like in application is one of those, you have to look at the individual tools and decide where you can use them. So look at Honey and see where having virtual hosts that provide more targets for an attacker, where that makes sense. Look at Security Onion, look at Teapot, look at them and say, well, is there one of these tools that it actually makes sense? Because you can answer that question yourself a lot of times. It's like, you can look at a security control for a client and say, you know what, this will do absolutely no benefit for this client whatsoever. I could sell it to them if they're willing to buy it, but it's not really going to improve anything for them. You can usually figure that out. Even when it is a new technology or a new tactic or a new process that you've not traditionally used, you can get a handle on it pretty quickly. So don't feel like you're going to be completely blind and not understand these. Just start looking at the individual tools and figure out where you can slot them in. And eventually you'll have enough of those things that you can start packaging them together as advanced cybersecurity services, as this cybersecurity deception and diversion that you offer. That can be very attractive for, I don't want to say the paranoid, but if you ever have clients that are of that persuasion, these types of things usually sound a lot more impressive to them, and sometimes they're more ready to accept these types of the associated cost with these types of things than just saying, I'm going to put a off-the-shelf EDR solution on your endpoints that everybody else, well, not everybody, but a couple of million other people are using too. Versus, I'm going to build up this this unique specialized environment that's going to confuse and throw off attackers, and it's going to improve our ability to respond to their attacks. It's all in the clients. It's half of it is as it always is. It's 80% sales, 20% what does the technology actually do. All right, so we've made it through the content that we've had prepped for today, for today's boot camp. And hopefully we'll see you on some future boot camps and office hour sessions. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us today. See you later.